for accreditation under the new delivery model. So I pass the floor to Antonios Zavos, who is going to do a presentation focusing on the changes to Guideline 2.
Thank you, Katia. Welcome back. The presentation will cover the proposed amendments for Guideline 2 under the new delivery model for financial year 2025. Although that's why it's in red, we strongly recommend that for those that can apply them already from financial year 2024. However, most of you are aware of the proposed changes. You have been participating on the Learning Network and the GREX meetings. There is a request on grading at intervention level, and this we expect that will be already from financial year 2024. The document for the guidelines for Guideline 2 should be read in conjunction with the documents that are under preparation or still in draft version, but will be finalized very soon, for the identification of the potential serious deficiencies and its relevant annexes, and the guideline for financial corrections. So, here is a slide where we just highlight the main changes. We have a significant change. Most of the changes are in Chapter 11, the assessment of the Member States' governance system. Chapter 12 regards the analytical procedures. Chapter 13, categorization of findings and establishments of the financial risk. We have enhanced and enriched the Annex 1 on the sampling methodology for the compliance testing for audit objective 2. We have slightly amended in order to make it more simple. Annex 3, the matrices of the governance systems. And we have created a new Chapter 6 on the evaluation of the functioning of the system under Audit Objective 2, and there is an Appendix 1 with some practical examples, which of course needs further enhancement with maybe some more examples. Okay, I don't know. As regards the topics, thank you very much. Thank you, Eduardo. I don't know why it's like this. We will cover the review of control procedures. We have some significant amendments as regards the testing approach. We will focus on that on the following slides. The testing approach are two. The Bureau approach that has been discussed for years, and the guidelines for financial year 2023 were based on this approach. And there is a new proposal to design your audit strategy and your methodology on sampling and evaluation at intervention level. Depending on the approach that you will use, we will discuss and explain the rules for rotation. Another innovation is our proposal for grouping the interventions on larger, let's say, groups that would make your testing effort less heavy. Another element introduced is the residual risk from the claims that have been remained untested by the paying agency, if this is applicable. Amendments on the evaluation, as mentioned before, of the functioning of the systems at intervention level. We provide the definition of reputational risk, some fraud considerations, and of course, as mentioned before, we have a simplification of the matrix in Annex 3. Oh, again, I don't know why. So, as regard Chapter 11, the review of the control procedures, we will focus on basic union requirements that has a compromising effect with a financial impact. So, what this practically means that errors or deficiencies that are considered formal without financial impact should not be reported unless we consider that by repeating those, a financial impact can actually occur. This is in line with the methodology for the identification of potential serious deficiencies, and the testing should be at population level, so EAGF, EFRD, IAX, and IAX. And the results when we test the control procedures is binary. So it means that it has been designed to work, or there are deficiencies already at the design level before going into the implementation. When things are okay, the grading that you should have on the review of the control procedure should be grading of 3 or 4. And when at design level the procedures are not doesn't include the necessary controls in order to let's say, address the potential financial risks, then we by default have a score grading of 1. So as soon as we finish the review of the control procedures, we go to the compliance testing actually, the approaches. New procedures or interventions, we strongly recommend that are tested within the first year, so that if issues are determined, the member state could take some remedial actions the earliest possible. The main change that we propose in Guideline 2 is the testing approach at intervention level. So you can select your sample at intervention level, and this is something that we will discuss further in the following slides. The compliance testing should allow the certification body to reach the conclusion on the proper functioning of the system, as well as the correctness of the outputs and the expenditure declared. So, just want to highlight in red that testing at the base of the basic union requirements are still applicable. However, I repeat, we believe that it is feasible to have a grading, a quantification of the deficiencies identified at intervention level, regardless of the approach used. There are no significant changes as regards the basic union requirement approach. So we have some selected at the level of the bureaus. We try to cover all the interventions affected by the specific basic union requirement. When specific isolated risks are identified for specific interventions, there additional testing or special focus should be given. We should focus again on the bodies implementing the basic union requirements and the controls related to these bureaus. So please be very, try to design the strategy taking into consideration of the bodies that implement the controls. It is totally different that control is carried out within the house, within the paying agency, or the task is delegated. a minimum number of items should be tested per intervention, so it will allow you actually, to give a grading for the specific BUR at intervention level, and then group all the tests per BUR in order to give the total grading per intervention. The considerations by using the basic union requirement approach is that the data that you need in order to select your samples, your different samples, should be very analytical. I mean, you should have great information, too much information in order to select the samples. And the main problem will be that a basic union requirement might be applicable only to a limited or to a part of the population compared to the expenditure of the intervention as such. For example, if we go to cooperation and leader intervention, where public procurement basic union requirement is a dominant requirement, doesn't mean that the whole expenditure under leader is subject to public procurement rules. So in order to evaluate your results, you need to have the extra information by the paying agency. And this is what makes this approach easier on the sample selection, but harder, let's say, on evaluating the potential financial impact. And now, on the contrary, the intervention approach, we have an independent sample per intervention. Even if the risk assessment that you have carried out is done at basic union requirement level. What that practically means? More than one basic union requirements are applicable to one intervention. The risk assessment of the most dominant basic union requirement should be your basis for your sub-selection, unless you believe that all other basic union requirements have a significantly lower risk. So you can take an average. Otherwise, we expect that your assessment for the most dominant basic union requirement should be the risk assessment for the specific intervention. In this case, it's very simple. The sampling unit is the transaction as such. And we expect that you test all the basic union requirements, all the controls that could potentially have a financial impact for every item on of your sample. Rotation and intervention level also can be applied. We strongly recommend that all interventions, or as we will see in the following slides, at least a group of interventions should be tested for the first year, but can be still applied, and the details for the rotation can be seen in Annex 1, paragraph 2.2. And how you can evaluate interventions that were excluded from testing for a specific year. So, the sampling approach and the rotation for the basic union requirement approach. I don't have many things to present. It's already described since last year. A detailed example is there, how you can combine the samples that you have selected for one basic requirement to use some items for the following requirements. So synergies can be applied. The test, the number of files are based on the type of control, manual or IT, and the frequency of the control. And rotation can still be applied at the level of the controls, which practically means that one intervention, when you select a sample for a basic unit requirement, and you know that this basic unit requirement is applicable to 5 or 6 interventions, you can exclude one of them from your sample, depending on the results of your risk assessment. Now we move forward to one of our innovations we propose for Guideline 2 for financial year 2025, grouping of interventions. So this is, as you understand, applicable only if the intervention approach is selected. We can group the various interventions into larger groups where conditions and the relevant controls are considered similar in order to have some reliable results with affordable effort. The idea is to reduce somehow the total testing for the objective 2, however, to have still reliable results for all interventions. First of all, we go to Ajax. We have already discussed that, and we have confirmed that for the area-related measures, EAGF and the FRD, the work should be based on the Ajax QA of the paying agency. Additional testing is needed for some of the horizontal basic unit requirements that are not part of the QA, such as circumvention clause, the active farmer, or whatever. Of course, then the only part that remains for testing is the animal-related measures. So the grouping of intervention focuses mainly to the non-Ajax populations. And this is very important, the results of the testing per group are applicable to all interventions included on the group, regardless of the fact that certain interventions were not tested due to rotation. So members, certification bodies that decide to apply this grouping, and within a group we have 3 or 4 interventions, and one is not tested, the average results as regards the CB findings should be used. There is a proposal in Annex 1, and the proposal for the non-Ajax is this. We have 8 groups, and the grouping is based on the articles of the regulation. However, we have some questions, received some questions, and we have already given this option in Annex 1 that the certification bodies can use other types of grouping that they believe that are more suitable for their case, depending on the type of control of the bodies carrying out those controls, etc. There's a grouping also of interventions for the Ajax interventions. And when we say Ajax, we talk about only the area-related interventions, which are subject to the quality assessment by the paying agency. Since I already mentioned, the animal-related measures are to be tested separately. So, and I come back. The certification bodies may use their professional judgment in order to find the group that fits better their needs. However, it is strongly recommended that this type of grouping has been discussed thoroughly with your counterparties, the paying agencies, that you agree in this grouping. Because you understand that the grouping decided by you would have an impact on the grading at intervention level. When we use grouping, of course, rotation is not applicable. We cannot say that we will select 3, 4, 8 groups and we will decide to exclude from testing a whole group. However, as mentioned, within the group, there are several interventions. There, you can exclude from testing one of the interventions, but the results per group should be used for assessing the total magnitude, as we say, for the interventions, even if those are not tested. So, which practically means that we have the residual risk for the paying agent that we should know at intervention level. And then, if an intervention is not tested, the average results of the group would be added to the residual risk of the paying agency for this specific intervention. And now, since I mentioned the residual risk, here is a definition. The residual risk relates to the expenditure declared to the fund for which there is no assurance of compliance with eligibility conditions. So it is assessed by using the information from the sample of items for which the overstatement has been determined. And it corresponds to an assessment of the overpayment not detected due to the fact that not all claims subject to a full check at all times and are not 100% flawless. What practically means, if a paying agency does administrative controls 100%, as regards the administrative controls, there is no residual risk because normally what should have been found is there. But if member states, based on the control system that they have designed under their CAP strategic plans, decide to apply a control rate less than 100%, then the results of the items tested should be applied for the items not tested. The total magnitude is the results of the residual risk plus the findings of the certification body. Here is an example, a table with providing an example. So in this case, the paying agency decides to apply 100% administrative controls, so there is no residual risk as it concerns the administrative controls, and 1% on-the-spot controls selected randomly. The errors from the administrative controls we do not care because there is no residual risk from administrative controls in this case, since all claims are subject to a control. But the 1.5% error rate found by the paying agency should be applied to the 99% of items not tested. Of course, here we have to distinguish what kind of errors have been found due to the on-the-spot controls. Doesn't mean that a claim that that is subject to on-the-spot control and has some errors, but those errors relate to administrative controls. This should count here. So the 1.5% multiplied with 99% of items not tested makes 1.40 1.9, actually it makes 1.485. This combined with the 0.75% errors found from the certification body in total from admin and from on-the-spot controls gives a total of 2.2. And in this case, the grading, depending on the frequency of errors, is 1 or 2. Now we'll go again back to what has been discussed and mentioned in red in the first slides. We expect to have the evaluation of the functioning of the system intervention level already from this year. And actually this is, don't know why we need to further discuss it. This is in line with the ISA 450 and 530 as regards the evaluation of misstatements identified during the audit. We repeat and that formal errors that do not have potential financial impact should not count, not even when calculated the frequency of the occurrence of the errors. And of course, should not be reported. We need to make both our and your life easier. So, for the evaluation, in order to summarize, we start from the control procedures. We evaluate the design, the setup, and the results there are binary yes or no. If the procedures as designed cover the specific basic unit requirements and the risks or not. And then we go to the functioning, and this is the results of your testing, but also of the paying agency results, if less than 100% control rate is applicable. And from your compliance testing, you should be able to calculate the total magnitude in terms of euros and the number of occurrences arising from the manual controls. We are not talking here about IT controls. This is a test of one. So for the Ajax, one grade as a whole for the area-related measures, and the functioning for the Ajax should be established on the basis of your assessment of the QA results and your results, but also the QA results. We have received several questions how we can quantify the deviations found in the QA in terms of euros, because normally the QAs report the deviations in the QA are reported in hectares. We still believe that it's feasible. We have provided the replies. The document has been published and will be available in circa, I think, it's already there. So, based on your examination, you should be able to validate the QA results or not. Secondly, you take into consideration some results of the IT test that you perform, and the results of other types of testing rather than the QA that you might do, as mentioned, for horizontal requirements that are not subject to the QA. For conditionality, the certification body needs to also to confirm the functioning of the control and penalty system and the magnitude of your results should be calculated, should be quantified as penalties that should have been applied according to your assessment compared to what has been actually applied. So if there's a case that the paying agency found everything correctly, so no penalty applied, and you believe that there is a problem, the difference is a quantification, or there might be a penalty of 1%, and you believe that is more, the gravity is higher, and according to the rules established at member state level, the percentage that should have been applied is higher. For conditionality also, you should test also whether the paying agency conducted the checks in line with the basic union requirement, and it's not mandatory, but normally when too many cases of errors have been found, the member states should take remedial actions to have an effective, let's say, control system. So the paying agency, the certification body should check also what are the remedial actions that have been taken by the paying agency. As regards the non-IACs, Appendix 6.1 gives an example of how to integrate the results of all tests per BUR. If we go to the first approach, the one that we have proposed already since last year, so the magnitude should be calculated by the projected results of each test streak of individual BURs per each intervention tested. So we have test streak of BUR A, where we have items for several interventions. The results of each intervention project, of course, to the population, to the expenditure. And then we take the sum of those project amounts for BUR A, for BUR B, C, etc., and we end up with a project amount of magnitude per intervention. Again, if rotation is applied for a specific BUR, meaning that one intervention has not been tested for the specific BUR, for the results of this BUR, the average results of the tests performed for other interventions should be applied. And the occurrence should be calculated on the basis of items with deficiencies found compared to items tested per BUR, and then sum them up. So it means no overlapping. What does it mean? We do not add the percentages, because it might be the case that then we end up with an occurrence of higher than 100%. So if for one BUR and for a specific intervention we test 10 items, 12 items, and we find one error, and then for another BUR we test again 12 or 15 items, and we find again one error, this is 2 out of 24, not 2 out of 12. So we add the sum of deficiencies on the upper part of the ratio, but also for the denominator, we also add the items tested. On the contrary, when we try to calculate, to quantify the deficiencies of the functioning of the system for non-IACs when using the intervention approach, then I think that is much more straightforward. Each intervention or group of interventions is tested and evaluated separately. We have one sample for a specific intervention or one sample for a group of interventions. We test A to Z. We found X amount of euros not in line with the rules, with the conditions, compared to the value of our sample. And this is our percentage, this is our magnitude. As regards the occurrence, every item with an error that has a financial impact counts only for once. It's not possible to have, even if we have an error for public procurement and an error in simplified cost options, for example, we cannot count in one item 2 errors. Because then this will, again, might lead to an occurrence of higher than 100%. Here is our proposal for the grading. I think that you are familiar with that now. Number of deviations more than 5% in occurrence and more than 2% materiality level in terms of magnitude. This should have a grading of 1. More than 2% in magnitude, but less than 5% in terms of frequency should be grade 2. And similarly, when the magnitude is less than 2%, depending on the occurrence, the grading should be 3 or 4. And it was passed very quickly. There's an asterisk, the reputational risk, and we go to our next slide. When it comes to the reputational risk, which is the potential serious deficiency in basic unit requirements that are such of a crucial nature that can jeopardize the function of the whole system and affect the reputational risk of the CAP, then the 2% doesn't apply. The threshold is lower, 0.5. The controls related to the reputational risk are the land disposal, the conflict of interest, the artificial creation of conditions to receive the aid, so the circumvention clause, and the double funding. And as mentioned, there the margin is much lower, which practically means that if based on your testing, the reputational risk is 0.6, we have already a grading of 1 or 2. Then, if your reputational risk is below 0.5, but in total you are with the reputational risk, you are more than 2, then it's again grading 1 or 2. So let's say that we have a 0.4 reputational risk and 1.7 of all the other remaining risks for the specific intervention. 1.7 plus 0.4 makes 2.1. So this is again grading 1 or 2. In order not to have, let's rephrase, in order not to have a grading 1 or 2, there should be simultaneously, we should meet the 2 conditions. Less than 0.5 as regards the reputation and less than 2 in total. There are some proposals again in chapter 11 of main document of guideline 2 as regards the potential fraud cases that should be isolated and treated separately. For cases where the paying agency were on their sample and there is some suspicion of fraud, the certification body should follow what are the actions taken by the paying agency to report them on the national authorities and/or Olaf. And when the certification body has on its sample cases that they are suspicious of fraud, but those cases have not been detected by the paying agency, and those cases, the certification body believes that there are serious grounds that are fraud cases, also those will not count on the valuation of the system for the specific intervention or the bureau, unless, according to your professional judgment, you believe that there is a deficiency either of the design, either the implementation of the control, that you believe that there is a systemic error that allows not only this case, but several cases to occur. Simplification of the matrices, Annex 3 of Guideline 2. What we propose, we group all together the area monitoring system, the geospatial application, and the system for the identification of agricultural parcels. We combine them, and this now becomes only one scoring as IXQA basic unit requirement. The conditionality has been removed from the horizontal requirements, and what this practically means that, of course, horizontal because it applies to more than one intervention, but it can be rotated. And penalties are removed and from being build column in matrices and have been merged to the build column for the system to ensure the eligibility of payments. And that was it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonis, for this extensive presentation. Now, let me open the floor for questions or comments. Spain.
At the GREX meeting on the 29th of April, we already said that we had problems with the sample carried out by the Commission services on quality control.
Nos iban a responder por escrito y acabamos de ver que acaban de subir la respuesta. Yo estaría encantada de decir que podemos hacer lo que ustedes recogen en esa respuesta, que es que the work of the CB at national level could replace the work of the regional CBs for the QAs. Eso ya les anticipo que es absolutamente imposible para nosotros realizar esa tarea. En primer lugar, porque no tenemos acceso, como servicio de control central, a los datos de la explotación de los beneficiarios del holding. Entonces, es complicado que podamos hacer eso cuando el control de calidad, además, se extiende a todo el expediente, no solo a la parcela seleccionada. Lo que sí quizás podríamos hacer a nivel central sería el LPIAs, pero el resto de elementos no nos resulta posible. Entonces, además tendríamos problemas con los ecoregímenes porque son distintos según cada región. No solo a nivel de FEAGA, pero desde luego a nivel de FEADER son completamente, las medidas del SIG, del Ajax, son completamente distintas. Entonces, bueno, yo solo les anticipo que esto no lo vamos a poder hacer, que para el ejercicio financiero 2024 no vamos a poder aplicar la orientación los cambios de la orientación del 2025 y que en el 2025 pues, o nos dan alguna solución o no, o haremos un trabajo de auditoría, pero que no encajará en el modelo de orientación que ustedes nos han dado.
Thank you very much to the Spanish delegation for that question. As you know, the samples are determined by the GRC in collaboration with DG Agri, and there is no influence from our side on the ways the samples are constructed, so that they're representative and they're not biased. And of course, in that way, some paying agencies in Spain are not represented in the IXQA samples, and this poses a problem for the certification body, how to test the IXQAs and assess them. However, I would say this is a very particular case, and we're open to sit down with Spain and find a solution for this issue, so that for financial year 2024, there could be a solution already. And also, so we can sit down and discuss bilaterally to find a solution. And then we see for the next QA sample to be selected for the QA, what can be done to make it not easier, but to have a solution already beforehand.
Thank you. Aún tengo.
Well, I still have
Si un organismo de certificación, su organismo pagador no está recogido en la muestra, o la muestra es de una parcela, como tenemos algunos, o solo se limita a determinadas medidas del SIG, del Ajax, no a todas, ese organismo de certificación tendría que hacer comprobaciones adicionales, porque el problema además que vemos es que si la muestra del control de calidad es la base para el muestreo de las medidas del sistema integrado en la matriz de objetivo de auditoría 2, ¿qué ocurre? Aquel organismo pagador que no esté incluido en la muestra, su organismo de certificación no debería hacer ningún tipo de trabajo sobre medidas del SIG que estén basadas en superficie, porque parece que es algo distinto. Lo comento porque nosotros tenemos 4 sistemas diferentes de gestión administrativa. A nivel central, uno podrá evaluar cómo se ha realizado el control del ISQA en determinadas cosas, pero yo es que lo veo, bueno, si acaso son temas que podremos discutir de forma bilateral, pero sí para ir avanzando, sobre todo en la estrategia de auditoría de este ejercicio financiero, si aquellos que tienen muestras deficientes o directamente no están en esa muestra, deben realizar algún tipo de trabajo adicional sobre las medidas del SIG que estén vinculadas a superficie.
Thank you. No, I understood, and I think your second question is in fact very much linked to the first one. So we have to sit down and discuss what can work for Spain in particular, because what we also want to make sure is not to impose additional requirements to some certification bodies and additional work So that's why let's sit down and discuss what can work for financial year 24.
Thank you. Any more questions? France?
Oui, bonjour, merci beaucoup pour toutes ces présentations. J'aurais 3 questions, l'une plutôt méthodologique, une autre plus une confirmation et enfin une question de formalisation aussi pour le rapport.
Seeking for confirmation, and then a third one to do with audit. The first question has to do with the new approach per intervention. We're wondering how we can actually come up with our sample if we to have a risk analysis per bureau, because that has to be quite refined. It would mean that we would end up with quite high combined risk for a specific bureau, but this would be for each intervention. And if we're at that risk analysis stage, then we lose the detailed analysis, and we might end up with a high combined risk for all of the interventions which are managed by our paying agency. And then I have a second question. It's more a request for confirmation on the size of sample. If we have a per intervention approach, should the size of the sample respect the minimum number of tests carried out or set out by in Annex 1, where the annex is dedicated exclusively to the number of tests per bureau? And then I have a question for confirmation on the audit approach. Now that we have an approach per intervention that's being suggested, how can we, in the audit report for GFC 20, we set that out, and particularly direct as guideline 2, because LD3, Guideline 3 and Annex 3 of LD2 is currently tailored to an intervention per bureau. And then the last revision of Annex 3 of LD2 sets out a revision of the list for the GFCR. And so we're just wondering whether there's a new version of Annex 2 of LD2 which would be put to us in order to take account of this change. So it's the merger, if you like, of the 3 BURs into a single one. I hope that was clear.
As regards your first question, I tried to explain it during the presentation. Even if you perform a risk assessment at basic union requirement level, it is still possible to select your sample per intervention. It means that normally we would expect that the most dominant basic union requirement for each of the interventions, or the one that the risk has been identified as higher, will be the result of the risk assessment for you at intervention level, unless you believe, based on your professional judgment, that one bureau is really, the risk is really high, but I have several other basic unit requirements where the risk is very low, so I can use a combination of the results. Now, the crucial question about how much to test per intervention level. It is up to the certification bodies to decide the level of the sample. We provide the opportunity to group them in order to make the work more affordable. But at the end of the day, we need to receive reliable results that we can rely on according to the single-lot approach, etc., that your test reflects the reality at intervention level. So I apologize, but there's no one-size-fits-all in terms of sample size. Testing at intervention level of 3 or 4 items, I think that all of us here understand that could not be sufficient. And yes, guideline 3, until now, it is, as regards your third question, guideline 3 is tailor-made on reporting per basic unit requirement. We are working on the development in order to have also results per intervention. Of course, the matrices per BUR still stand. We want the detailed analysis from your tests that there is a problem for this intervention and the problem comes from this specific basic unit requirement, of course. But we are working also on development of guideline 3 in order to have the opportunity to have at least the grading per intervention already for 2024. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Romania.
Am o întrebare referitor la...
Yes, I have a question on the option of simplified costs. I see the new line 2, Annex 2, line 2. It's a separate BUR. But in the matrix, it does not exist. Annex 3 was not amended. So we don't clearly see what this is linked to. And we get the impression that now this is a horizontal requirement. That is with regards to simplified costs. Thank you.
I'm sorry, you mentioned Annex 2 of Guideline 2.
Da. Apare ca BUR separat scoul acum în anex.
Now it looks like this is a separate BUR in the annex, in Guideline 2.
We will double check, but I don't think that there is a change. Simply, Annex 2 lists the basic requirements, IAX and non-IAX, and simplified cost options is part of the protection of financial interest. So, the matrix, I think, is...
Da, este nu acum în anexa 2 la linia 2 pentru
Yes, but now in Annex 2, line 2, non-IAX populations, the option of simplified cost is a horizontal requirement.
It is a horizontal requirement because it's on the protection of the financial interest which cover more than one interventions. But in Annex 3, simplified cost option is part of the pure column protection of financial interest. I don't think that there is a change there. We will double check it, but I don't think that there was any change compared to the previous version. Simplified cost options, it is a horizontal requirement. Now, how to check it? Of course, you check the methodology, as already we have discussed it several years also in the past. Simplified cost options, you check the methodology once, then the implementation of the methodology, whether it is effective, and when it comes to your testing, on the items that the simplified cost options are applicable, you see whether the methodologies have been applied correctly. That's it. It's 1 minute. Eh? No, it's per item, it's 1 minute. You check whether the amount is the same as the methodology. But you have already checked once that the methodology has the correct amounts and, how to say, a reasonable amount.
Okay, thanks. The French delegation.
Oui, bonjour. Merci pour.
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. Quite simply, we already said last time, methodologically, we still have some difficulties with regards to the calculation of the amplitude with residual risks and the errors detected by the CB. We don't think we're putting together things that are totally unrelated. One is something that comes from the fact that certain farmers didn't respect, or the beneficiary did not respect certain requirements, and the other is whether we are in line with the procedure and what is required. And as we've already said, in the streamlining workshops for controls, in order to respect our requirements, is to deal with those aspects that cannot be properly dealt with under administrative controls. And if we cannot control by 100%, then there's a financial risk for substance and also a risk for financial recovery. And it's because you did not take account of the fact that the effectiveness of a system is linked to the fact that there should be zero error for beneficiaries, and therefore once we cannot carry out 100% control and have a sure source of information, and we need to focus on a sample, then there's a relatively high financial risk.
that is a very interesting intervention from France, which provoked some additional follow-up questions. Can you please give us examples of these eligibility conditions that in France were now in the CAP strategic plans and that are not 100% controllable administratively? Because you explain it as a difference compared to the past. So in the past, everything had to be controlled administratively 100%. So can you explain at least that aspect? What are these new requirements?
Alors, non, je sais pas exactement ce que j'ai dit. C'est
It's not exactly what I said. I said there is 100% administrative control. And we continue to have 100% administrative control in France. That's the choice we've made. But today, when we are calculating the extent, the amount, which would detect whether there's a serious deficiency and possible financial penalty, then we take account of the errors that we can detect on the spot controls, and that's based on additional documents that allow to detect errors that cannot be detected at the administrative control level. And that's what I was talking about. Previously, we had error rates that were quite high in certain mechanisms, and therefore that didn't mean that the system didn't work. It's simply that it is detected at a later point than an on-the-spot control.
Oui, alors là, on est peut-être plutôt à vraiment...
Well, you're really speaking to the new model, how it's conceived. In the past, there were rules that were the same for everyone in terms of administrative controls and penalties or sanctions, and this was uniform across Europe, established by the co-legislator. That was much decried over many years, much criticized. And this was one of the reasons we set up the new system, which gives a bit more latitude to member states to put in place their control systems based on what is necessary in their member state, based on their specific situation. So control rates will be different from one member state to the other, and the sanctions as well. This flexibility has been granted. We do not want to stand in for you, and nobody wants us to do that. We do not want to stand in for the co-legislator giving you guidelines saying that if you do so many controls on the ground, that will be good, and then we will be sure that you have the right system. Then we would simply be going back to the previous system. So we have to look at things differently. This is why we are proposing to see whether the systems function based on the discussions. Here, what's a working system, what a system that doesn't work. We believe that if the residual rate goes above a certain percentage, then it is not working. There is a problem with regards to how it works. And then we come and we discuss this with you and see what is not working. And perhaps one of the actions is to once again instate on the spot controls, or raise the sanctions, or have a risk analysis. So that is the foundation for the meeting that we have here, that we have discussed over the last 6 months, because we need to have something in place. So how can we be sure the system works? And perhaps this is what is different from the past. Before, the co-legislator took the decision ex ante. If you complied with certain rates, then the system was working. This was not always the case, as we all know. So now we need to look at the systems from a different perspective. We no longer have these benchmarks, these thresholds. We need to have a different approach to the system. So this is new. This is something that will have to be set up. And this is why we stay in contact with you. And this is why these guidelines 2, have not been adopted by the college. it is something we are working on together. And by that, I don't want to say that we'll go from 2% to 50%, but we need to look at how things are working, and where we identify difficulties, we can move over time to clarify certain aspects. I think that was the question, and I hope my answer has clarified this basic idea for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we are already 15 minutes over time, but of course, if there's more questions, I'll be happy to take them. So first, we have Slovenia.
Slovakia. Thank you. I would like to ask you one question related to the error rate calculation in the situation when you are testing controls, like a CB. And for example, control like land of disposal and some items don't end with payment in that financial year. So do they need to be replaced, or how will the error rate be calculated?
Sorry, I didn't understand very well. What do you mean if they should be replaced?
In the situation when you choose some items and they don't have payment.
If I'm not mistaken, there was a similar question like that in the questions that we received from certification bodies in the context of the GREX meeting on the potential serious deficiencies and the CB's work on AO2. But anyway, you can have a look if it's there, but what I can say is that there could be two options. So depending why there was no payment, was the payment zero? So that's what you mean, because the paying agency did something, they verified that the beneficiary didn't have the land at the disposal, so de facto the payment is zero because he or she is ineligible. In that case, no, you don't have to substitute this item because just the payment is zero. Just you have to make sure that what the paying agency did, so the control of the paying agency, was done properly. And then if there was no payment for another reason, because there was a delay and then it will be paid next financial year, which is okay, exceptional, but still it's possible. So it's more to investigate the reason why the payment didn't happen, and if needed, then to substitute it. But again, if the payment is zero, no need.
Okay, thank you. And Bulgaria has a question.
Thank you. I would like to ask something about Ajax. If we assume that the internal control system is the same and use the BURE approach, especially for those BURE conflicts of interest and system of identification and registration of animals, we have assessed the risk is medium. According to the guidelines, we should test 35 items. Can we use this 35 item sample proportionate to both funds, or we should use different samples for each fund?
As long as the system is the same, yes, you can mix.
Thank you.
And maybe just to, as a follow-up to my reply to the French delegation, because it made me think. So one thing you said that we have no tolerance at all, or that you cannot make any mistakes anymore. So let's recall also that up to 2%, when we talk about the functioning, we consider, it is considered that the system functions. So which means that we would not open an inquiry to apply a financial correction in case you are up to 2%. So there I would kind of correct a bit this statement that there is no tolerance or that all errors would be penalized. And because this is something quite far-reaching, I must say. And we hope this will not lead to a situation where actually everything increases everywhere. I think it's more based on the fact that when we are in the functioning, up to a certain level, mistakes happen for many reasons. And it doesn't mean that we are in front of a systemic issue, but more that, okay, for many reasons, because there are human interventions, because there are errors by the farmers, etc., mistakes happen. So just a reminder of this key principle.
Okay, and Maria has found the number to the question for Slovakia.
So it's number question and reply 48 in the Q&A document for CBs that was compiled in the context of the GREX meeting on the potential serious deficiencies and the guidelines for financial corrections. And that questionnaire was also published under the folder of Circa BC for that expert group meeting. So now all the certification bodies have it also. Thank you.
So basically it's the same reply in writing for everybody to refer to. Okay. Other questions? I suppose this is the most challenging topic on today's agenda. Of course, we have the workshop also tomorrow. So I propose that we take a break for 15 minutes. So please be back at 15:35 to wrap up today's session.